next person I'd like to call up is Professor Jason Corburn, and with him I'd like to call up Miriam Salam. I'm calling up Miriam also because she helped to identify from about 50 different applicants that this was an outstanding nominee for our Global Citizen Award. Miriam's been involved in her high school, involved in Model UN. She's an outstanding student leader, and she's very active in the United Nations Association, and was involved in the intergenerational Model UN, somewhere between the 11-year-olds and the 93-year-olds, I believe.
Thank you, Eric. Professor by day, global citizen by night, Dr. Jason Corburn's outstanding work internationally nominates him as the perfect recipient for the Global Citizenship Award. Not only does his work in Nairobi and Kenya provide access to clean and affordable water for the people of these nations, but more importantly, one of his highlights for his projects is bridging generations of young students from the East Bay and Eastern Africa to his cause, inspiring the leaders of our next generation to be a part of alleviating poverty and connecting with the development of our ever-so-growing world. So please welcome Professor Jason Corburn.
Thank you. Good evening. Okay, just trying to get the technical thing sorted out here. I wanted to thank the United Nations Association for this wonderful honor, and to thank my other fellow awardees. It's a really wonderful, wonderful honor. I also wanted to thank my family for being here and putting up for me with me as I am away from home too often, and my students who are an integral part of this work that I'll talk about very briefly. And importantly, as I'm showing here on this slide, our partners on the ground in the urban informal settlements in Nairobi and across Kenya. And this work and this award I really must accept on behalf of and in partnership with my civil society partners and University of Nairobi partners in Kenya. And without their partnership and their leadership and really their expertise, this work would not be possible. So I wanted to acknowledge them and their importance in all of this. I'm going to talk a little bit about our work in a community called the Mathare Valley. If I can find the pointer here, it's up on the top right. It's one of the largest informal settlements in Nairobi. And you may have heard of an informal settlement called Kibera, which is often called the largest informal settlement or slum in Africa, and that's down here on the lower left. And we've been working in partnership with residents in the informal settlement, and when I say we, I mean our students here at Berkeley and our civil society partners in Nairobi. This is a little image of the Mathare Valley, and it represents, it's cut off on the top of the slide, but 65% of the city of Nairobi lives in this kind of condition. So it's the majority of the city. This is not an exception, but the rule. And in fact, one of the Millennium Development Goals was to improve the lives of 100 million slum dwellers by 2015. But by 2015, we're facing a planet of 2 billion slum dwellers. So the scale is really a tremendous challenge. We live on an urban planet, and it really matters where in cities you live. And this kind of condition, with the majority of the city being an informal settlement, is the rule rather than the exception in hundreds of cities around the world. And in fact, one of the key conditions and concerns of our partners, of the residents in the Mathare Valley, is health and well-being. And this shows that moving to Nairobi or living in a city is healthy for you, for a whole host of reasons. But where you live matters. And if you live in a slum or an informal settlement, in this case, child mortality is much higher than if you live somewhere else in that city. So it matters where you live in that city, and in fact, what we found, it matters how decisions are made and who makes those decisions. And in fact, that's the thrust, the focus of the work that we've been doing in partnership in Kenya, which is really working with residents to help them and working with them to define their priorities. And their priorities are often safety, health, basic services, like reflected in many of the Millennium Development Goals. And they have defined an improvement plan and what we call an informal settlement or slum upgrading plan, really a community development plan to meet the needs of their lives. One of those needs clearly was water. This is an example of water collection. Clearly disproportionately falls on the backs of women and often children, and has a whole host of impacts on people's lives. Some of the work that we've done has highlighted that it matters where in Nairobi you live. So for example, it's not enough to know that in an informal settlement or a slum in Nairobi, you have a lack of in-house clean water and affordable water. We found in our own work that the Mathare Valley, the informal settlement where we're working, is disproportionately burdened even within the city of Nairobi. And we began to help our residents build a plan and make this case for investment in infrastructure and improving their lives. One of the ways we did that was they collected survey data, on the ground, household level data, and made maps. And our students helped them turn those maps into sophisticated computer-generated images like you see here. What you're seeing here is an aerial image of the entire Mathare Valley, and this is a city within a city of over 200,000 people. And the dots with the purple circles around them are the location of water points. And you can see they're not evenly distributed across this community. And so what we also realized was map making and making the invisible visible clearly wasn't enough to get government and others to act. What we needed to do was to also make a strong case using some of this resident-collected data and information. What this is the number of people servicing, having access to one public water point. And the red line represents something called the Sphere Humanitarian Standard that some of you may be aware of. This is the international standard for an emergency response after an earthquake like in Haiti or a natural disaster. An emergency response comes in and they plan some services. And this red line represents 250 people per water point. But what we have in the Mathare Valley is a chronic condition of, in some cases, 1,500 people servicing one water point. So clearly a violation of human rights and action desperately needed in this community. So we went to work. We weren't satisfied with just collecting data. We wanted to turn this into action, and that's exactly what we've done. We've worked with young people from the community, from people at the University of Nairobi, our partners, and our NGO and civil society partners, and Berkeley students. Over 30 Berkeley students, undergraduates and graduates, have accompanied us and worked on the ground with residents to develop a plan. And this is some images of our Berkeley and Nairobi young people planning an alternative future, turning an existing reality into a cleaner and healthier future. And so just last year, we were able to get a plan approved by the Nairobi City Council and the local water district to implement, for the first time, water service, not at a community scale, but in homes. Everybody having an individual private water tap for the first time in Nairobi in an informal settlement. And so we weren't satisfied with that, as other Millennium Development Goal of sanitation and clean toilets also a priority. And unfortunately, these images here from the community might represent an improved toilet by some international organizations. And of course, this was not satisfying or sufficient for residents, nor our partnership in Nairobi. So we're currently working to highlight these inequalities and these disparities. Again, we collected data on each individual village, which is kind of like each individual neighborhood in this Mathare Valley, of how many people are serviced by one toilet, one of those toilets I just showed you, so even an unsafe, unhygienic toilet. And again, compared it to the severe humanitarian standards, and you can see this chronic inequalities, chronic conditions faced in the Mathare Valley. And ironically, or perhaps in a disturbing way, many folks in the informal settlements have access to technology, and we feel strongly that this is not a technological solution, but this is a political and human rights issue. We've also tried to and managed to make this raise the global profile of this issue. And this is important because there are many donor and volunteer organizations that are trying to improve the informal settlements and make contributions by funding a community toilet, this is an example of one in this image. But what happens and what we know from our partners of a community toilet is that at night, without lights, there are dangerous places for women, often sexual violence and rape, and the spread of sexually transmitted diseases. They also are stigmatize women and children often. They force people to use flying toilets, which for those of you who know what that is, I guess it's dinner time, so I won't get into it too deeply, but you can imagine what happens in a bag and you throw it over your shoulder. So highlighting these inequalities in access to sanitation and toilets has been a major part of our work right now. And in fact, we're currently involved, this is an article from one of my students just recently in the UK Guardian, about a lawsuit that we're partnering with our civil society organizations to force the government of Kenya and private landowners to deliver on that human rights issue of safe sanitation and clean, hygienic toilets, particularly for women in the informal settlements. This is a human right and a right defined in the Kenyan Constitution, the new Kenyan Constitution. So we're still working on that, and we'll be likely having a team in Kenya of students, both from Berkeley and local university. So just to sum up, this has been an ongoing partnership for over 5 years that we've developed this working relationship. We've engaged over 6,000 families in the planning process to define priorities and move towards implementation, including many young people. I mentioned that we really engage with undergraduate and graduate students, and as part of their education, as was mentioned earlier, we feel strongly that there's a lot to learn, particularly on an urban planet, that learning from the global south for issues and challenges right here in the Bay Area is critical. So we partner with local universities and civil society groups, but they also come here. And every year, once or twice a year, we have students and faculty and our NGO partners come to Berkeley and spend time at the university and in the community here. And in fact, now we have 2 students who are getting their masters here at Berkeley who started as undergraduates on our project. This takes very little money, in fact, only $1.5 million to deliver that water to over 22,000 slum dwellers. But it's still not enough. We're still working to deliver safe and clean water to that 200,000 and everyone else in the informal settlements, again, over 65% of the city of Nairobi. And the cases of disease and just general livelihoods that we have impacted in some ways is immeasurable. So we continue to do this work, and again, I want to thank the UN Association for this wonderful honor, and thank you very much.